There's only been one Blade. There's only ever gonna be one Blade.
It's kinda crazy to think that Marvel announced a Blade movie almost 6 years ago and they still haven't made it. And this is quite possibly the most mishandled movie in the MCU's history. Sure, Marvel has made some big mistakes in the past, but their attempt at a Blade movie is one of, if not the longest development hell that one of their projects has gone through. Besides, they aren't just fumbling Blade, one of the most popular black superheroes ever created. They're also wasting Mahershala Ali's time and talent. He's an amazing actor who could easily give a fantastic performance as Blade if only Marvel could finally just let him, because their handling of Blade has just been kind of embarrassing, to the point that Marvel has now officially taken out Blade from their upcoming release schedule and is postponed indefinitely, if not just flat out cancelled. Some of you might remember that Marvel actually got back the rights to produce Blade films from New Line Cinema in 2012, and there's been reports of Marvel already working on a Blade script all the way back in 2013, so that means Marvel has been trying to figure out how to adapt Blade for over an entire decade. That's insane, especially since in that time they've basically done next to nothing. And during the Eternals post-credits scene, we saw Dane Whitman picking up the Ebony Blade, teasing his identity as the Black Knight, and we also heard some dialogue from an off-screen character.
Sure you're ready for that, Mr. Whitman?
Allegedly, that voice we heard was actually meant to be Blade, since Mahershala Ali had an uncredited speaking line in the movie, and this was supposedly teasing some kind of future crossover between the Black Knight and Blade, with people even speculating that Marvel is planning to adapt the Midnight Suns. Of course, absolutely none of this has happened yet, and Eternals came out in 2021, so the people who saw this scene and still remember it aren't even that excited about any of this anymore, since by now we already should have seen an MCU Blade movie years ago. But there's one thing that makes all of this even funnier. Marvel has recently released some stills from their upcoming Marvel Zombies animated show, and one of the images they released was of an alternate version of Blade that's picked up the identity of Moon Knight in that universe. We're actually gonna see a Blade variant before we get to see the official MCU Blade from its main timeline. That's just shameful, and it's all because Marvel Zombies has been in production for years now. It was announced around the same time of the Blade movie, so they included a Blade in the show because everyone thought that his MCU movie would have already come out by the time that they would release Marvel Zombies. It's truly embarrassing. What's worse is that this won't even be the first time this happened, since Marvel already introduced another version of Blade before their own MCU version in Deadpool and Wolverine. Of course, it's the return of the Wesley Snipes Blade that we all know and love, and it was genuinely awesome seeing an old man Blade version of him interacting with other Marvel characters. But introducing two alternate Blades before your official MCU version is just really backwards. So we can see that the last time Blade has been adapted for now was in Deadpool and Wolverine, and he'll soon have another adaptation in Marvel Zombies. But in both of these cases, he only plays a small role in the story. When you think about it, it's been almost 2 decades since we've seen Blade as the main character in a solo adaptation that completely focuses on him, since his last movie, Blade Trinity, came out years ago in 2006. However, Blade's last solo adaptation where he was the sole main character actually happened in 2011, when Blade was the star of his very own anime series. This came as a result of a collaboration between Marvel and Japanese animation studio Madhouse, who produced 4 different shows focusing on Iron Man, Wolverine, the X-Men, and Blade, as well as a couple animated movies later on. The quality of these projects were kinda mixed, but personally, I thought that the X-Men show was pretty good, albeit with some flaws, and Blade's anime was, in my opinion, the best project to come out of this collaboration with Madhouse. This anime has a very detailed art style, great action scenes, and is overall really well animated. And while its plot is admittedly kinda thin, it does have some good character work, since it explores in detail Blade's tragic backstory and his connection to Deacon Frost, showing how Frost bit Blade's mom while she was pregnant, which caused Blade to later be born as a half-human, half-vampire hybrid, and his mother to die while in labor. Blade was later raised by his mother's friends in the brothel she used to work in, but this would only last until Blade was a young kid, since they would all end up dead with only him surviving, making him obsessed with finding Frost and killing him. they also explored the backstory of Deacon Frost, showing how he willingly became a vampire after his own son was killed by one years ago. This show arguably does a much better job at giving depth to the rivalry between Blade and Frost than the '98 movie, and it doesn't shy away from tackling very heavy subject matters like death, grief, human trafficking, or even slave labor. A common criticism that's thrown to these Madhouse Marvel animes is that their stories basically revolved around different heroes having adventures in Japan, since if you want to oversimplify things, some of these shows can be summarized as just Iron Man goes to Japan, or the X-Men go to Japan. But this show in particular is much more than a simple Blade goes to Japan plot, given that he not only goes to Japan, but he also travels all across Asia and gets to fight against mythological creatures unique to those countries. For example, Blade and his allies go to the Philippines for a couple episodes, and they fight against Mandurugos, which are cryptids that look like harpy vampires that actually originate from real-life folklore from that culture. Another mythological creature from the Philippines they adapted are the Manananggal, which are flying vampire-like monsters that can separate their torso from the lower half of their bodies. When traveling in Malaysia, Blade fights against the Balong, which is a tiny being in the form of a human woman in real-life mythology. This inclusion of many different folklore elements really shows how the writers and artists put a lot of creativity and attention to detail into how they adapted Blade in an Asian context. And it was a good way of adding variety into the show. Blade not only fights against vampires, he fights demons, mutants, water tiger weremen, and much more. However, I think that the series' biggest strength is how it portrays Blade, since not only did they do a good job with his characterization, visual appearance, and his backstory, but they also understand that Blade, as a character, works best when he abides by the rule of cool. If you don't know, the rule of cool is a trope in different forms of storytelling or gaming like in D&D campaigns, where an over-the-top moment that might break reality or logic can be excused if the moment is just plain cool, even if it doesn't make any sense. And in my opinion, this is a huge reason why the original 1998 Blade movie worked so well. The movie knew that it was absolutely ridiculous with all its exaggerated gore and cheesy one-liners, but they still did all those things because it simply looks cool. And the confidence in what they were doing enhanced their execution and made every action scene more awesome.
Some motherfuckers are always trying to ice skate uphill.
Even when Blade was just having dialogue scenes, he was always cool. And the Blade anime used all this to its advantage. Like, for example, Blade in the show has secret techniques like in shonen battle animes. And he even says the name of the technique before he does it. Why? Because it's cool. That's why. Plain and simple.
Deadly Sword Technique number 1, Residual Moon.
You can just sense how the show's crew made sure to always frame Blade in such a way where he's always looking clean. And I really like that they included such a common anime trope like superpowered techniques, especially since they're very fitting. Deacon Frost even has a transformation later on, much like an anime villain. This is why I honestly can't understand how Marvel could possibly be having such problems with writing a Blade movie, since this should be one of the easiest characters to adapt. Seriously, all they need to do is make John Wick but with vampires, or The Raid but with vampires, and the vast majority of people would absolutely love that. The original Blade movies really weren't deep or complex at all. They simply were unashamedly cool, and they prioritized being cool above everything else. Maybe this might seem like an issue to Disney and Marvel executives, since nowadays they don't really make movies with more straightforward, lower stakes stories. It seems like every new MCU movie we've been seeing for the past few years always have to have world-ending threats and overly complicated plots that allow for easy integration with the larger Marvel universe so they can set up even more future stories. But they're overly complicating things in situations where there's really no need to add so much complexity. Sure, Avengers movies, because of their very nature, should have higher stakes and larger stories with ensemble casts. But it's a huge mistake to tackle every single Marvel movie like that. There's a lot of characters that work much better when they're used in more focused, simpler, straightforward plots where they can truly shine, and Blade is one of those characters. His old movies were simple but very, very enjoyable, and Marvel doesn't understand that they could very easily make a film like that if they simply got out of their own way and stop overly complicating things. But that's just my opinion though. What do you think about all this? How would you like to see Blade get introduced into the main MCU? And what did you think of the Blade anime if you've seen it? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, thank you very much for watching.